We are now live. Okay, welcome everybody to this session on LinkedIn Live from 1080 Career Hub. We're talking today about getting a job overseas, something I'm sure many of us have contemplated in our career. And, there's a bit of background noise from you. I am going to host the session today. My name's Alison Ainsworth. I'm an executive coach and a career transition coach working in the field for a number of years for 1080. I'm joined by my two esteemed colleagues today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And then we're going to talk through just the ins and outs, the do's and don'ts, the pros and cons of working abroad. So without further ado, Ollie, I'll come to you if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, no problems at all. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Olivier Lander. I'm the CEO of Global Talent Hub. I'm actually based in Switzerland. Very much my background is 30 plus years in the HR and recruitment space.
Excellent. Thanks, Ollie. And Paul.
Thanks, Alison. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Johnson. I'm currently based in London, in the UK, and I'm a head of compensation advisory. And my experience has been in compensation over the last 20 to 25 years, primarily in CIB, so investment banking, but now I work for professional services. And I also had a stint of 10 years in Hong Kong, which I think is going to come up shortly.
It is. That's why we're looking for your expertise, the things to consider, the do's and don'ts. But first, I'm going to go to Ollie, and the first question I want to ask is, what are the best platforms and recruiters to focus on when you're searching for a job overseas? A question I'm sure that many people are keen to understand. How do you start? How do you go about it?
Sure, perfect. Yeah, well, I think there's multiple answers to this one. Clearly, it depends on which countries effectively you want to go to. Yeah, overseas, because that each country tends to have their own sort of job boards, tends to have their own set of recruiters. My suggestion is that if you're looking for something very specific, you might have very niche recruiters in the market, whether it be in the finance space, the insurance space, etc. And there are numerous companies. So I'd always suggest that you take a look at which ones are most prevalent. But actually, the big generalists as well are worthwhile taking a look at. So the typical sort of Randstad, Adecco, Manpowers of this world, because the euphemism is that most of those companies are mainly sort of blue collar led or very much in that space. But actually, it's not true. They have a lot of brands. They have a lot of different types of businesses, and it's definitely worthwhile approaching them because they are global. So their platforms are global, etc. But one of the things I think which is quite interesting is if you're looking for specific jobs in specific locations, using aggregators like Indeed is definitely worthwhile, simply because you can do very honed in searches and it will pull up all the jobs in that particular area or region for you. So that's also something which I think is quite useful. So as I say, there's multiple ways of cutting this up, and there's multiple ways of looking at it. But definitely, I would say, there are very specialist and niche players in the market. I'd approach them if that's your speciality. If you're more of a generalist, then you can obviously go with the generalist agencies as well.
Yeah, great, and absolutely, it's very country specific and country led often, isn't it? So, yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next question then. So I know, Paul, you didn't find your job found you, I think, would be fair to say. But let's give a quick overview to the listeners around your experience of working overseas.
Sure. So, I mean, the first thing to say, really just on his point, but I wasn't actually actively looking to go overseas at that time. But what I did have was a very clear LinkedIn profile that showcased my experience. And because the company was looking for quite a niche amount of experience to do with a certain aspect of HR, that's how I got picked up. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known, because the headhunter was also not someone I knew. I didn't know who they were. So I definitely would say that the LinkedIn was an integral part of actually that part for me. I think the whole, I mean, I could probably talk for hours on this, but generally speaking, when I was considering and then working overseas, I think having that open mindset and embracing, your new location is really important, because what you'll find yourself doing is you're in one location now. I've got my friends around me. I actually have family around me. So I'm in a comfortable place. But when you go overseas, and for me, it was Hong Kong, actually, all of those people aren't there anymore. And I think especially when you go to a place where the time zone is, quite significantly outside of your home location, you can feel alone, to be frank. So I think keeping a positive mindset, and something that I did sort of purposely, which is not something I'm great at, if I'm honest, is networking. So the networking, at least professionally, helped, because it was a bit of a lead in to meet people and get contacts. But also personally, because you have to have those people. We generally want to have people around us, for social. So that was really important, but that can take time. And I think the final thing I would say, because there's numerous things, is that when you do go overseas, it's to be mindful of how you feel, because you probably will hit a wall at some point. You will have homesickness. It will be that sudden realization, wow, this is not a holiday. It's not a business trip. Actually, this is my life. And now I have to find a flat and I have to pay bills, and just like everyone around me. And I found that difficult. And I think a lot of people do. But again, networking helped. I reached out to people in my network that had done the same thing. And they kind of talked me off the ledge, if you like, and said, look, this is totally normal.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid point, because like you say, a lot of people think it's glamorous, don't they? They think it is like an extended holiday, but yeah, you're missing all of those home comforts, and I'm sure you'll come on and talk a bit more about some of the things that the practical tips around. Is it really a good option for everybody? But Ollie, oh, sorry, Paul, did you want to jump back in?
No, I was agreeing with you.
Yeah. I'm going to come to you, Ollie, because I know you are currently out in Zurich, and so you do work abroad, and I know you do travel extensively. I'm sure I've talked to you, and you've been in various different capital cities. So what's your experience of working overseas?
I'd say that similar to Paul. I think there's lots of different considerations that come up, but I think you're absolutely right, Paul. When you go to a different country, it's not only the culture that you have to adapt to, but it's also the languages. Because imagine you have to get yourself a flat and you don't speak the language, and you've got bills coming in that's not in your language, etc., etc. So there's multiple things that you need, and that network is really, really important. And I think just to give you a connotation, I love rugby, so I'm big into rugby. When I moved from the UK, I was working in London. I had all my friends, my family, everybody out there. When I came to Switzerland back in 2010, the first thing I did was actually I found a rugby club. And that was my sort of point of entry to build that network, Paul, that you mentioned, of people that were, familiar in the same sport. You could talk English, or in my case, I speak French, so I could also speak French with the guys. So that was really something that actually helped me integrate. I think the integration into a country is particularly something which can be quite overwhelming, because there are multiple barriers, not only language but culture, but also the way that people work. So if you're in the UK, it's a very sort of open culture. You can pop around, you phone your friend up and say, hey, I'm just coming by, I come and have a cup of tea, and just, no problem, just come in. In Switzerland, you can't do that. It's a completely different culture. You have to make an appointment. So it's a slightly different way of looking at it. So you have to adapt to your environment. And I think that's something that I had to learn pretty quickly. And also business wise as well can be very different as well, in terms of how you approach people and how you do things. So I think there's multiple levels, but I have to say that my experience was after time was quite enjoyable. I love working abroad. I love traveling, which is part of my job as well today. So to your point, Alison, I run around all the different countries in Europe. So that's the fun part of my job.
Go on, Paul, you go.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's an interesting point about culture and being in a new location. And I think something that can't be underestimated when you move somewhere where you don't speak the language, and dare I say Chinese does feel very complicated to me. So it's, so it wasn't easy to even pick up. But what you find is, when you're in an office, like we might be, you hear things, you pick up on things, and that's another natural way to make connections and have conversations. But sometimes you have to be aware that when you're in another location, like I was, actually the people around me were speaking in Cantonese. So that kind of day-to-day feel had gone, everyone around you is speaking that different language.
Sorry, I suddenly found myself in the dark there. That was interesting. I think that's an interesting one. My experience, even just sort of going to other cities and trying to get on a train or a bus, or go to your local bakery and order your favourite type of breakfast items. It's all a bit of a minefield when you don't speak a language. But I also think it makes you more empathetic towards other people who come to our country and don't speak the language. So yeah, great point. Michael has asked a question, and I'm just going to put that up. I'm just going to throw this one in now because and show you what he's asked. So thank you, Michael, for the question. I think it's a really interesting one. So how important is networking, and does it differ in different countries and cultures? From my experience, I think it does, and Ollie, you touched on that, is that there are different ways of working, and I don't know, Paul, about your experience, but certainly, I'm aware that in the Chinese quite often do business outside of the work hours. They say all the deals are made when you're in the restaurant, when you're eating, that sort of thing. So I'll let you guys answer that question. So Paul, can I come to you first on that one? What's your experience of that?
Yeah, of course. I think, my experience specifically in Hong Kong was, if you like dim sum, you'll be lucky. So a lot of good networking and a lot of business contact can be done over dinner. That's for sure. I think understanding the nuances of what is the right thing to do and what isn't. So similar to what Ollie said, which is like, instead of just saying, hey, let's grab a drink, like instead it might have to be a more formal request. Is important, and being respectful of their way of life, actually. So I found that even though I'm used to a certain thing, a good example in the city of London could be, let's have a drink on a Thursday night. Okay, actually this is almost completely unheard of with local people in Hong Kong. Let's go out for dinner, absolutely, but it's a different kind of style. So it was really important. And that wasn't something I really knew until I moved there and immersed myself. And that's when I realized, actually this is how to do things and to get ahead and to, get the results that I wanted, is to work the way that people work in Hong Kong and not the way I worked in London before.
Yeah. And on the networking point, Paul, how important did you find networking in Hong Kong? Is that something that they did a lot of? Or?
They did. Yes, absolutely. And the thing was with Hong Kong, just like London, there are multiple nationalities there. So you really are meeting people from all over the world, just like if you go to an event in London. But because you have normally a commonality, like your rugby club, but in my world, it was more boring and about compensation. You can then, you have something to start with, which even for someone like me that's not necessarily very good at networking or a little bit fearful of it, actually it was easier to do so because there was a commonality that we could learn from and then grow. And then from that, you can become friends with people or, strong acquaintances. And it makes a difference to have those in your back pocket because they will be very supportive in your time in that location to have those people.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And just for the record, Paul, there's nothing boring about compensation.
I know that. It's just everyone else, but yeah.
Brilliant. And Ollie, what about your experience?
Yeah, I would say that both as a recruiter in the past, and also a recipient myself of having to travel around the place, I think that networking is super important. I think it is actually a key for getting on within the culture and understanding the culture quicker. I think if you stay a little bit outside and you don't do that networking, you lose out. And that's where those walls will come up, and that's where, you know, the feeling of homesickness really comes into play, maybe much quicker than it would normally as you go through. So I think that's also something which I think is important to take into account. But you know, I think networking is done differently in different countries, so you have to be mindful and respectful of the culture and the way it is. And similarly, I think the Asian culture is a lot with you know, going out for dinner and it's interesting because it's getting to know each other in a different setting, in a much more you know, it's not a formal setting, it's an informal setting, and I think that's where people sort of bond and gel, and you get that feeling of togetherness. Actually, it's no different in most countries. You just apply it maybe in a slightly different way, or you approach it slightly differently. Like I said, it might be more formal requests as opposed to a spontaneous, let's go and have a drink, or let's go and have dinner.
Yeah.
But definitely it is important.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and I think certainly around, you know, building a network that's going to support you, not just, you know, personally but professionally, is also very helpful in any culture. Yeah, and it's also changed a bit since the pandemic, and I think, you know, people aren't together as much, and that hasn't, you know, the ways of networking have also changed. So some of that's done now online as opposed to face to face. So I think we've seen a few changes there.
And I think also the conferences, I think one additional thing, Alison, is, you know, being able to go to industry conferences that are relatable to your industry or your area. Actually, that's a great networking platform as well, because you're meeting like-minded people, you're meeting people that are within the same set, and that also helps in terms of development as well.
Yeah, great. Okay, I'm going to go to our next question. There's a couple of questions come in that I'm going to, I think if we've got time, we'll answer both of those. But I think we're going to jump into practical tips for people. So, you know, what are our practical tips for people considering working abroad? So, Paul, if I come to you first, what do you wish you'd known that you know now?
I certainly wished I'd done a little bit more research. I think I was a little complacent with Hong Kong. I'd been there before, and I thought, well, you know, I feel like I can settle in here quite quickly. You know, it sort of drives on the left, looks a bit British, all this sort of stuff. Wrong. So to really understand that what you're doing is quite big, right? And to research and take a look at, you know, what is out there. There's a lot of information out there about your new location. Forums, I did look at to see what it would like to live there and cost of living, and things like that. I think the other consideration is to think of what you're leaving behind. So to square that away, if it is possible to do so, don't let it block you, but some things it could block you. But just to be aware of it and tackle it as you're thinking about whether to move away, because it has an impact. If you move, you know, it's a significant distance, you're a plane ride away. If something does happen in your home location, it is not quick and it's not simple to get back. So it's worthwhile just thinking about the people around you and the impact you will feel by leaving, and the impact that they may feel by you leaving. But the balance of probability hopefully would be positive, right? And you can make that work.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I found in my working time, working with expats as well, was their exit strategy, and coming back, making sure that they'd got a passage back, because sometimes, particularly from a succession point of view, they felt that out of sight, out of mind, they weren't necessarily being considered anymore for roles perhaps back in the UK. And I don't know whether that was the same in your world or not.
Yeah, I think one thing that I did do, the positivity that I put to it, I was very excited about the job in Hong Kong. So I was kind of 90% there in my head. Considering these other things, it felt like my view was nothing is permanent, right? So if I've been in London, you know, all my life, if I'm going to Hong Kong, as long as I have money to come back, right? Worst case scenario, actually it's worth it. Go for it, embrace, be open-minded, but know that there is an exit strategy, as you call it, either through your company or even on your own. You don't have to rely on your company always if things are not working out. And I think that's okay. I knew many people that came to Hong Kong and it just wasn't for them. It's a completely different culture and it just wasn't for them and they left. But then there are people like me that have been there 10 years and now 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, brilliant. Ollie, your experience and practical tips then.
Yeah, similar to Paul. I think it's getting to understand, and I think there's a lot of now with the internet, etc. I think there's a lot of information out there that you can actually go to. So the forums you were talking about, Paul, in terms of looking at things. Also, elements like calculators, tax calculators, to calculate, if I earn this amount of money and I'm here, what does that relate to? What am I going to get net? You should also ask, I think, your future employer also to help you with that as well, to have an understanding, because ultimately you are coming to a new country. And in certain circumstances, I think if you are relocating from one country to another within a company or to a new company, see if there's a relocation policy. See if there is something that is there that enables and helps you to actually move across. And usually they have a company that will do that for you, that will then look at flats, that will help you to set up a bank account, all the usual sort of things that you need in day-to-day life. And I think that's really important. Plus, on top of that, with relocation packages, to your point, Paul, you could usually put in a return flight if it didn't work out. So at least that's covered in some shape or form, because as we know, these things can cost quite a bundle, depending on which country you're coming back from. So I think those would be the sort of practical tips. And again, I think talking to people and talking to people that are interviewing you, effectively also asking them questions about, how is it to live in the country? What are the things I should be mindful of, etc. Those are the things that you should be asking.
I mean, it's a great question to ask in any interview, is like, what's the culture like, or why do you like working here? I think they're two fantastic questions. So great tips, guys. Thank you for that. We did talk about the question, is the grass always greener overseas? And without being negative about that, I suppose we have talked a little bit about the cons, what's the downside and the things to consider. But is there any one thing that you would want to point out, Paul?
For me, it's positive, right? I mean, if you get past all the hurdles that we either give ourselves when we're thinking about such a big move, if we can get past it, you have to have a good, open, positive mind. To me, it's taught me unbelievable amounts about myself. I mean, even speaking on a platform like this, one of my first things I had to do was do a presentation to everyone in Asia, so quite a number of people. And the feedback, my boss was going crazy on the phone, and I was like, I can't look at that. I was speaking too quickly. No one, hardly anyone is English speaking as a first language. And I realized that was the first time I'd considered, I'd really sort of considered that. So I learned a lot about how that culture works. And actually within Asia, how the different cultures of the countries work. It can be easy to block Asia as one, great big mass, but it isn't. And I think the other thing I would say, just on that point, is the great thing about Hong Kong is a springboard for many countries. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ignore COVID, because Hong Kong, COVID was dreadful. We were in lockdown, I think, for 2 years. But, there's nothing to stop you going for a weekend in Tokyo, to Taiwan, to Bangkok. And I miss that so much, because that really is also a lifestyle of local people. They do it all the time.
Yeah, fantastic. Ollie, what's your thoughts?
Similar to Paul, I think my experiences were very positive, but also because I embraced the fact of going abroad, and I think you need to have that. To Paul's point, I think it's not for everybody. I think it depends on your family situation as well. Is your family joining you or not joining you on this trip? There's a variety of those factors, and I think depending on the situation, you are quite far away, particularly if you're in Hong Kong. You've got those hours of flights or flight to country, and you can't just come back on a sort of on a turntable. It doesn't happen that way. So I think it depends on your situation. But I think if you do go to another country, all I would say is consider the option of actually bringing your family with you, because I think it's enriching for your family. It's enriching for kids. It's enriching. It really gives you dimensions and cultures, etc. If you have children, but I think that's something which I really benefited. So my kids coming to Switzerland, for example, they now will speak 3 or 4 different languages. They've really embraced, and we've embraced the culture. But you have to do that to really come out the other side. And I've heard, other stories of people who it wasn't greener, because at the same, you're going to have exactly the same topics in the country as you have at home. Don't think that just by going to another country, it's all rosy, because it's not.
Yeah.
No. Some great points there, guys. Got a couple of questions come in. I'm going to put up the one from Haley. Haley is asking, is it important to be present in the country when you're looking for work, or are employers happy to talk with remote interviews? Well, from my personal experience, I think people are happy now, post-COVID, to talk to you remotely. But guys, I mean, Ollie, I'll come to you on that one. What do you think?
I think that it depends. It depends on the company. I think it really depends on the company and the culture. But I would say that most employers, particularly if they're looking for a very specific skill set that doesn't necessarily exist in their local environment, they would be going out to a more international and expat crowd. And I think that's where you would have these remote interviews, because they're not going to fly you over just for one interview. What they're going to do is they're going to do the pre-interviews and the pre-selection process up front, and then they're going to invite you over, maybe for 2 or 3 days, and then you're going to have the full panel, because they want to make sure they maximize the time. So I think that you'll have that opportunity to do the remote interviews initially. That will enable you to gauge also if it's the right fit or not, as a country, but also as a location and a company.
And I think that's something to be prepared for as well, like to go there, because for me, I was remote. I had my second interview on the Monday. On the Wednesday, I was at work and opened my email, and they said, "Can you come on Friday?" I was even scratching my head if it was possible. It was. I went, and then, as you say, Ollie, actually, I then spent, I think, 5 hours. I was just in a room, and then various people were coming in, and they allowed me to stay actually another 3 days, which was really helpful. So I think having that flexibility to be able to do it worked, because I think a lot of companies, Ollie, I don't know your experience, but I think a lot of companies, maybe specifically in the Hong Kong one, they do value that sort of face-to-face, interaction, especially if it's a key hire or a niche role that they're hiring for.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think most companies will want to see you physically and face to face, simply because I think that it's also the connection, the social connection, and we know skill competence is one aspect, but actually the personality and the fit is the other. Do you actually fit with the team, the people, etc., etc. You only really know that, I think, in a more physical setting.
Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? I'm conscious of time, guys. I'm going to combine the last question from our audience, which is from Liz, about, is there anything that surprised you at working overseas? Can you combine that with your top tip to leave people with? So, Ollie, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, what I've learned is to change my own mindset. I think having gone in with, so my background is, both my parents are Swiss, but I grew up in the UK. So I've got a very Anglo-Saxon mentality in the way that I approach it. So coming to Switzerland, I had to switch my mentality rather quickly, because you can't be a bull in a china shop, effectively, as I was, just in the industry that I was in, compared to what you do in Switzerland. So I think for me, the biggest learning and the quickest thing that I had to switch was my mindset to fit the culture.
Yeah, I have to agree with that totally. I think if you don't switch that, you may fail, right? Almost definitely you may fail. I think for me, what I learned about getting that job overseas is just the fact that I could do it. having that belief and that confidence that you can do it, and it's possible. Believe in yourself and the abilities that made that employer reach out and say, hey, come and join us, and don't let your new life, your new location kind of swallow you up. Be part of it and grow with it. So I actually surprised myself how I settled into that eventually, after a few months.
Great top tip. And I mean, again, for anyone starting at any new role, it's, have some self-belief, some confidence that you can do this. And there's a reason that they've offered you the job, because they think that you can do it as well. So yeah, great tip. Well, thank you guys. We're out of time. Thank you very much for your insight into working overseas. And hopefully everybody who's listened has enjoyed the session. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.